I'm Rob Wolcott, professor of innovation and author of Proximity, How Digital Technologies Drive the Creation of Value Ever Closer to the Moment of Actual Demand. I'm here today in Scottsdale, Arizona at AXON's headquarters. There's nobody in the public safety and security arena anywhere worldwide that is anywhere close to AXON in terms of driving the proximity revolution. I'm so excited to have a conversation about that and the future of public safety, security, technology, and maybe even beyond with the founder and CEO, Rick Smith, and President Josh Isner here at AXON's headquarters. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming out.
And not only coming here to your headquarters, but here is something. I mean, I walked in and there was some sort of like sci-fi Men in Black thing. I had to, read my face or something. What the heck is going on here, Rick?
Life should be fun. Work should be enjoyable. And we are bringing James T. Kirk's phaser to life. Our streaming body cameras took more than inspiration from James Cameron's Aliens movie. Remember Apone down in the area, live streaming video. And so I have found science fiction is a great inspiration for creativity, and putting it into our workplace, there's a little bit of like life imitating art, and it helps with the people we want to recruit. And our guests have interesting experiences. When you come here, it's different. You're not at a typical, corporate place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I could see some lightsaber stuff going on up there on the platform. So how does that?
Did you come to that completely on your own?
I'll admit, I plead the fifth.
Okay, because with catwalks, we often say every great lightsaber fight happens on a catwalk, so we have to have several. Yeah.
There you go. So how does that relate to performance? I mean, one of the things that I study, I'm fascinated by, is the relationship between vision and performance, vision and then making reality happen. So Josh, your enviable as well as unenviable role is to try and figure out how to take these extraordinary visions and turn them into reality. How do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's a completely enviable role. Like being able to work with someone like Rick, like how many people get to work with someone who is literally the best at what they do? And that's how I feel about Rick. And so I think my job, is a dream job because, most companies struggle with like, what are we going to do next? What are the product ideas? Like, how do we keep this thing going? And we have the luxury at AXON of that never really being the thing that has the potential to slow us down. I think for us, it's how we organize, how we execute, and making sure we don't trip ourselves as we're running down the field. And I'm very passionate about that. Rick's very passionate about, writing the future in terms of our product strategy and vision along with our customers. And, when you have a team where everybody, has a role that they're excited about and they're doing their job and they're focused on that and they trust their teammate to do that same thing, that's how you can achieve not only great speed, but great value creation and results. And I think that's what we're doing here.
Fantastic. Well, you mentioned a dream job. It's kind of a dream job to turn dreams into reality. But let's go back to the beginning of this reality, the origin story. Tell us briefly where this all came from. I know it had something to do with Captain Kirk and and his equipment.
Yeah, it's hard to identify the exact moment when any idea starts. But for me, there were a couple things that happened in rapid succession. I was in graduate school at the University of Leuven in Belgium, and I was having conversations with some of the local Europeans, and there were moments where they would say things like, well, I'd never go to America, there's too much gun violence. And there was one moment in particular where we're having a conversation, and I said, well, don't believe what you see on TV. Like, Scottsdale, Arizona is great. Let me, I wanted to tell them about my hometown. Right. And they said, do you know anybody who's been shot and killed? Kind of rocked me back on my heels. So yeah, these two guys who played on my high school football team, we weren't, super close, but they ran in the same social circles, and they were shot and killed at a local golf resort here from a traffic altercation that spun out of control. And so in that moment, you sort of realize when you feel like you've just lost an argument or a debate. And so that got me thinking about, sort of gun violence being maybe more prevalent as a problem. Then shortly around that time, I remember I was riding on the trains. I was touring around Europe like a good student, taking the Eurail. And one day I read the Wall Street Journal, and there was a prominent story from the Centers for Disease Control just published the gun death statistics. And I think they were for 1991. There were 37,376 gun deaths. And that struck me as just, I thought it had to be a typo. For whatever reason, we try to quantify and compare things. I jumped to, wait a minute, we lost like 68,000 souls in Vietnam, but it took us 10 years to do it. So it means we're losing more people every 2 years inside America to gun violence, and that's 5 times the intensity of the Vietnam War. And then the final piece was I was talking to my mom, and she said, hey, your dad took a job in San Francisco. He's going to be commuting from Arizona. I'm going to stay here, so I'm going to go buy a gun to protect myself, since your father's not around. And I just blurted out, well, why don't you buy a taser, Mom? I'm not sure a gun's a great choice for you. She said, I'll check into it. And I don't even know where the idea of taser came from. I actually think it was, the taser technology is actually older than me. Clint Eastwood used one in The Enforcer, but I think I saw it first in Jean-Claude Van Damme's film Time Cop in the 80s. Anyway, my mom went to a gun store and she asked if she could buy a taser, and they said, no, ma'am, it's illegal. You can't have that.
But you can buy a gun.
Yeah, and I'm imagining the ridiculousness of this. If we're like, would you like an AK-47 or a shotgun?
Right.
And look, I had actually bought my dad a .44 Magnum Desert Eagle, so I understand the allure of guns, and I'm not pro-gun or anti-gun.
Right.
I am of a belief, though, that technology moves on, and to me, it's bizarre that in the year 2024, the state of the art and the way we stop somebody who's being aggressive is we blow a hole in them with a bullet.
Yeah. Well, let's jump forward to this mission you're in the midst of right now, and it's up here on the screen, Moonshot, your Moonshot for 2032, I think. But I'm going to ask Josh to briefly explain this big vision for 2032, and how does it relate to what you're doing here at AXON to make this reality?
Yeah, sure thing. The number of deaths in public safety incidents between police and civilians, that number's been flat for about 20-ish years.
And climbing. Flattish and climbing.
So it's not something that is naturally resolving itself. Like we're seeing this trend go in the wrong direction. Yeah. And so, for us, as we think about the impact our products can have in these very stressful situations where frankly, people die, in these situations, we're looking to cut the number of deaths between public safety and civilians by 50% in the next 10 years. So between officers dying in these altercations and civilians, we think we can, through taser innovation, through things like real-time awareness, through robotics and drones, we think we can drive that number down and achieve a 50% reduction by 2032.
Well, I'm a big fan of having clarity of purpose, and I know all of your customers have the sense of mission focus, mission clarity, all that. But how do you take a big vision like that, like Moonshot, and translate it into actions on a daily basis?
Let me actually step in first, if you don't mind, to give you a little bit more of the backstory.
Yeah.
So where this came from, we found a lot of success. We started in a garage. Right now, we're right around a $30 billion market cap with 4,000-ish people. And as you get bigger, one thing that has kind of frustrated me is larger organizations, there's this risk aversion that sets in.
Right.
I still don't know the exact source of it, but it was really frustrating me that our taser product development, we weren't pushing hard enough. Each successive version of the taser was a little better than the one before. And so I started challenging our team to say, look, our job is not to just sell the next version of the taser. How do we make the bullet obsolete? And so internally I started putting this, I challenge you guys to give me a weapon that outperforms a 9mm bullet in stopping power. And that led to a lot of conversations. And I found it was very useful, and suddenly I'm getting much more creative answers back rather than incrementally, hey, where do we go from this taser to the next one?
Well, Rick, what you did, and I talk about this a lot in my work, is you reframed the challenge. You gave them the totally different frame to think and act in. It's still focused, but it takes a different look at the world.
Okay, what could we do to actually reduce these? That's where this idea came up. We could cut them in half. And the punchline was about 40% of officer-involved shootings involve things like edged weapons or long delay periods where they could use if we gave them a better version of the taser. And then if we add the idea of drones and robotics, we get up to over 70%. And so I use that as kind of an internal rallying cry. And you start to see it stick. And then we basically started talking through with our customers, and even more importantly, some of our critics. because we knew to do this, we're gonna have to make tasers more aggressive. They're gonna have to get longer range with more shots, right? Historically, we've had a 2-shot weapon with maybe a 15-foot effective range. And we've seen in the past, we've introduced more aggressive tasers, meaning with more capability. A lot of folks who are critical of police will focus on, well, what could go wrong? How could this be abused? And so this has been a focusing function where it's like, let's talk about why we're doing this. It is, if we give police more options, they will shoot and kill less people. And that's really crystallized. And then, of course, Josh has now taken that vision, and then he's got to translate it into, okay. And it's not just even in the taser. It's become a driving force in how we think about like our whole VR training strategy.
Well, this is part of where I was going with that. I think it's safe to say that if your vision is to decrease gun deaths by 50% by 2032, we can't do that just with a better taser. That's a critical component. But this is why I got so excited about watching the evolution of AXON over the past few years, to see you going into body cams, collecting those data, analyzing those data, and then now you have your AI system which I'd love to talk more about how that's going, what you see in the future, where it allows officers to do far more with less, and it responds in the moment of demand, which is quintessential proximity. And then what put it over the edge for me was when you bought the drone company. So I said, here's a company that really sees what this proximity thing means. It literally is about setting up systems, products, technologies, platforms to respond in the moment, anywhere, anything, anywhere, anytime. So tell us about these new developments in, say, AI. What does AI mean for AXON? What does VR mean for AXON and your customers?
I'll take AI, maybe if you take VR.
Great.
AI, I think we can leverage it. Policing is an interesting job. There's parts of it that are quintessentially human. For example, the decision to use force on another person, that is a moral, ethical decision. And I think we would want human beings clearly in control of that. But there's a lot of the job that is just busy work, that is the
TPS reports.
Documenting
That's right.
And preserving records. When we first started doing body cameras, I was pushing, hey, why do we need police reports anymore? We've got the video. Well, in order for any organization to work, there's process flows, and not everybody who's going to review is going to sit and watch the whole video. So they need written documentation. You need structured data like names and dates and locations and incident types. And so that's where in 2017, we put out a vision video. And look, it was smoke and mirrors.
2017, what were you envisioning in 2017?
We'll show you the video. In fact, you could edit it in. We showed an interaction with a police officer coming up to a woman and just interviewing her. And she pulls out her driver's license, and it gets scanned by the camera. And it was a vision video for how we use AI to pull all the information out of a body camera video, so that officers could do the thing we pay them to do and want them to do, which is police work, not the bureaucracy that actually consumes about 50% of policing resources.
Yep. And that's quintessential generative AI. It sits there doing nothing. We know there's a server in Iceland maybe, but it's doing nothing until the moment you need it, you push the button and bang, it's done.
The thing that's been interesting is we would have, two things. We would have thought that the vision component would be really critical. Turns out it's not. Large language models, we get better reports if we don't try to do vision analysis on the whole video.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's too much information, and then sorting out what really matters. It turns out in the verbal interactions, policing follows a pretty formulaic interaction. Hello, sir. Do you know why I stopped you? What's your name? Let me see your driver's license, et cetera. And we can extract 90% of the police report from that verbal interaction. And we have actually found, interestingly, it is retraining officers. They're becoming much more verbal, which is something that police leadership has been trying to do for a decade. How do we get officers to relate
Rick,
more?
Why are they becoming more verbal? Because they want to populate this database?
If I tell you what, the more I'm verbal with you, the less I got to write about it later. And so I'm explaining to you why I stopped you. Now, the agency wants you to do that because it makes for better police public interaction, but the officer selfishly be like, hey, if I just explain it now, I don't have to write it later.
And then it's done. That's fantastic. I'm going to make a prediction. I think in the next 5 or 7 years or so, you're going to find new applications for the analysis of the vision aspect of your product and your database. That stuff that people aren't really thinking about now that will come out from the analytics that we haven't even imagined.
100%. When I said it was a little too much, it would do things like, it would say, okay, in this frame, there's a middle-aged, white male who at one point looked suspiciously to the side, or it was describing things in a way that you might say almost like a human being with autism, for example, that doesn't understand some of the nuance of what's appropriate or not in terms of how you describe things.
Very literal.
Very literal.
Yeah.
And as we looked at that, we said, well, the police reports would get way longer. Yeah. And then ultimately the report has to be, legally, it's got to be a representation of the police officer's view of what happened. And so it would create so much stuff they've got to go cross-check.
They've got to go edit and check. Yeah.
So I think I don't think we're going to be using much vision in the report writing process. I do think we'll be using vision to extract metadata for search and analysis purposes.
Yeah, great. So Josh, let's talk about, speaking of vision, let's talk about virtual reality, augmented reality. What does that mean for your customers and for Axon's future?
Yeah, I mean, taking a step back, no matter what you do or make a career out of, or you're good at as a hobby, things take practice, right? Just the repetitive nature of doing them over and over again, and really training yourself how to in the moment, not just to be able to trust your training and not have to make intentional decisions and simply react. It's true of sports, true of doctors making their rounds, whatever the case may be. And that's the opportunity we want to give to police officers. Right now, to simulate what they might see in the field without VR, you kind of see these training exercises where someone's running around in like a Velcro suit, or it's like it doesn't quite simulate the stress of the actual moment. And frankly, training police officers is really expensive. You think about all the logistics of getting police officers to leave the field, have someone else cover for them, drive across town, all convene in one place, use cartridges and tasers that you have in your training inventory. There's a lot of cost to all that. The idea that you could put a headset on and far better simulate the type of stress you will be under in the field, and what we found is that leads to far better retention for the police officer. And then to be able to practice that every day if you want to, instead of once or twice a year. I say a lot that, our mission is to protect life, and the taser and all of our technology, that makes its way out into the field is part of that. But the other part of that is training. And the better we can prepare officers for the stress that they will see in these moments in the field, the more likely they are to drive a safer outcome. And I think we owe that to, the expectation is we get there, and that's the expectation of police officers. They keep people safe. I think it's only fair that we give them the tool that really enables them to be prepared.
That's brilliant.
To do that.
So it really is closer to the visceral experience of being in a situation, being in a training, but actually feeling it. I remember the first time I tried virtual reality was, 10 or 12 years ago. It was pretty rudimentary. It was actually really heavy and uncomfortable. But it was this vision of a cliff. And, you've probably done this, right? Everybody's done this now. But you're standing there and that you're on a concrete floor. And intellectually, but you're feeling this vision.
Yep.
And the guy who was sharing it with me said, "Okay, jump off the cliff." And I'm like, so all right, and I jump, and I felt my heart racing.
Yeah.
At that moment, and this was pretty rudimentary.
Yep.
So it's one thing to do a training exercise with a bunch of dummies.
Yep.
It's another thing to do it when it feels real.
No question.
Where do you see some of this AI, VR? Where do you see this going 10 years from now?
Oh, I just had the opportunity to meet with Prem, the CEO at Stability AI, which, so they're really focused on video. Their background, he had done a lot of special effects work. James Cameron, I think, just joined his board this week. And so we were jamming on ideas about, so where we'll be in 5 or 10 years. I think you'll be able to use generative AI where a customer could say, hey, I want to create a scene like in a Denny's where there's a domestic dispute and it escalates to blah, blah, blah. And you'll be able to generate, your own content, with kind of text into a full VR experience.
Yeah, this is so.
Or from body cameras, like, to be able to start with a body camera of an actual incident and then translate that back into a rendered 3D experience.
Recreate,
Yeah.
hypothesize various backstories,
Yep.
Look at a crime scene and imagine what it could be and go through various scenarios.
Yeah.
In early November of 2022, so just before ChatGPT launched to the public, obviously there was stuff going on behind the scenes. I was at the Black Nights Film Festival in Estonia, and I don't know if you've ever been to Estonia, but they're absolutely brilliant. It's the highest number of unicorns per capita of any country in the world.
Wow.
So you guys need to get to Estonia. Hi to my Estonian friends. But I was at the Black Nights Film Festival, and they asked me to talk to a group of the people behind the scenes in the film industry who make the product. And I said, you know where it's going is real-time video creation, content creation for an audience of one. Now we still hopefully will want to watch Citizen Kane, fine, but you'll have real-time content creation responsive to your desires in that moment. And by the way, Rick and Josh, I'm not necessarily saying that's going to be great.
Yeah.
I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
But that's where it's going. And the fact that you've found some tangible value-added applications for this that's where we move to the future, because people are making money.
Yeah.
Outcomes are better.
Yeah.
We get better. We learn, etc. So what's I'm going to ask you, Rick. How do you you and your team come up with vision for what's next? Is that something intentional? Is that something that your way your mind works, it's serendipitous and things happen? And then I'm going to translate that to how do you, when you hear some crazy idea from Mr. Smith and you say, okay, we got to circle the wagons and figure out what to do. What have you learned about being that vision strategy dyad? What have you learned about making that work?
So I think creativity is a team sport, and the more sort of open you are to other people's input, it really does make a difference. I'll just give you an example. In my early career, after a couple failed products, I had a couple big hits back to back, and I had Steve Jobs syndrome, where I thought, I got this. Like, I am going to go and develop products in secret. And it was clear to me that we had done the first effective taser in 1999. It really worked. Then we made it much smaller so it could fit on the belt. And it was obvious to me the next thing was going to be multi-shot. You need more than one shot. And so I pushed our team and we built a 3-shot taser. And I remember the first time we showed it to a former police officer inside the building. He said, hey man, you're the boss, but I think that thing's too big. People aren't going to carry it. And I said, come on, you're not seeing the vision. When customers see this color screen, it's going to be red, yellow, green, let you know if you've got a connection. It's going to do all these great things. They'll make room for us. And so we kept it, kind of secret and did the Apple-esque reveal on stage. Right. And the union filed a grievance that they wouldn't carry this thing because it was so
too big.
It was causing them to sit funny in the seat because it couldn't fit with the seat belt. And they were getting back problems. So as a contemporaneous with that failure, right, 2 or 3 others at the same time. The one was our first body camera, and it just exploded in complexity. We're getting way too carried away with all the bells and whistles. We built our own touchscreen computer, a radio interface hub, and then we had to learn how to interface with all those mission critical radios from a bunch of different vendors, and then a head movable camera that was, as one of the product managers lovingly says now, looking back, was about as sexy as braces, with the big head brace.
Yeah, I had one of those.
Coming out of that, like, it's good I'm the founder, because otherwise I probably would have been fired after like a bunch of disasters in like the 2008-9. As we recovered from that, one of the things we did is we just instituted this voice of the customer process where, like yesterday, I was with a bunch of police chiefs. Here at headquarters, we host these CEO summits all the time. We bring in customers. I travel and see them, and we talk about, so it's an iterative process. Hey, what are the big problems you're facing? Then I go to these futurist conferences, and my job is to sort of connect the dots between, hey, wait a minute, I'm seeing this new tech over here, there's this problem over here. And then we'll actually, our customers love doing this thing we call Shark Tank. And literally, we'll bring them in, we sit them with our engineers and product leaders, divide them into teams, they'll do pitches, product pitches, like they're on the TV show Shark Tank. And we get great ideas.
This concept.
Yeah, did you? Yeah.
So anyway,
have you talked to the team whether you should get some licensing revenue from that?
Yeah, we have not. But so basically it's become much more collaborative. And so basically that's my job. I work with our frontline product developers and customers, connecting those front lines. And I spend most of my time there. Josh is sitting at the top of the organization, running and managing everything. And those are just two very different jobs.
Very.
And I think a lot of times that's why founders end up not being successful in the CEO role if the expectation is they're going to be, managing budgets and people and policies and all that. And it's a very different headspace. Yes. It's very hard to go from all the things I've got to do that are keeping me up at night to manage all the people and things, keep the trains running on time. And then if you have that same person be like, okay, how are we going to challenge our own system and where do we need to change? It's impossible. That's where there's this dynamic tension between the two of us, which is good. And he pushes back when it's like, hey, Rick, that's a bridge too far. People are at the breaking point. We can't do that yet. But Josh made a compliment or best at what I do. I would say I have the opportunity. I'm working with the best in the world at what he does. If we weren't doing this, Josh would probably have beat out Belichick to be the coach of the Patriots or something. He is a phenomenal manager, leader of people and teams.
Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, there are other examples of leadership dyads. And when you find that right dyad, I often will get an entrepreneur, it could be a Booth alum or a student, and they'll come to me and they'll have this vision and this idea. And sometimes that horrible quote from Steve Jobs comes up, which is, the customers don't know what they want until I show them. And they think, that's what I'm going to do. I said, well, maybe, but Steve Jobs was Steve Jobs. So you got to listen to customers. You got to incorporate that into your vision. You got to go through the crucible of the customer. But then on the other end of the spectrum, Rick and Josh, you get established enterprises where they might say, well, we talk to the customer, this is what they want, that's what we're going to do. But the customer can only tell you what they already know. And if they're telling you, they're probably telling the competition. So somehow you got to strike that balance of going to the future conferences and finding the crazy stuff and then figuring out how to translate it and then how to bring it out to customers in a way that works for them.
And when to listen and when not to. So I'll give you an example. When we started with cloud software, all of our customers hate it. They said, this is illegal. We can't put digital evidence in some cloud thing.
I talked to one of the founders of CrowdStrike too, and everybody was ridiculous. No bank is ever going to use this. They said the same thing. It's illegal. Yep. Where are we now?
So this is an example where we would then dig in and go, okay, the real objection is security. But the customer doesn't understand cybersecurity. In fact, most of our customers don't even have a person with an information security title anywhere in their organization.
At that time.
Well, even today, many of them don't. Government just moves slowly. Most of our customers are 20 to 50 person agencies of some local city municipality.
Right.
And so,
that's true.
And many of them have since been hacked themselves in ransomware attacks. So that was a case where I think it's just instructive to people when you think about when to listen to customers or not. We understood what their concern was, but they didn't have the expertise. It was making them uncomfortable, but fundamentally you could almost mathematically prove the cloud was going to be more secure than what they were doing at that point in time. And so that's a case where we didn't listen. Or the other one, when we were our third generation of body camera, we basically said, we're debating, look, we should make this a connected camera. Up until then, you would record, download at the end of the shift, and you could use the information tomorrow. Look, I don't know what the use cases are, but if we had the connected camera, we could use that information now. So let's put an LTE chip in it. But all of our customer data said, our customers had no interest in live video streaming or any live connectivity.
Because of concerns about control of those data, or the video?
I think more like they didn't want to be micromanaged. They would have visions of like, my boss is going to be watching me and then trying to micromanage me, what I'm doing. But the point was, we then went through this debate. Okay, we think connected cameras will be useful. But the rational business thing would have been, let's make one without the LTE chip, because the LTE chip's like, $70 of cost of goods. Let's have two SKUs, one with, one without.
Sure.
And we decided, nope, because if we did that, every customer would buy the one without the LTE chip. So we're going to bite the bullet. We're going to put an LTE chip in every camera, even though customers are either telling us they're not interested or they actively don't want it. And
So you launched. How did it go?
It was slower initially. So we had a break even where it's like, look, to cover this, I think like 45% of cameras would have to connect to make that a good financial decision.
Yeah.
And for the first generation, that did not happen. But we're now on the second generation. I think we're now above break even on that decision. But that's what's enabling Draft One.
Right.
Because we can push the video off or the audio off in real time. And by the time, if you're in your patrol car, it's there and you can use it.
By the way, Rick, describe Draft One for everybody.
So Draft One is our AI report drafting tool. We take the audio from the body camera, we transcribe it, and then we refactor it using formal sort of police language to take the same information but present it as a draft narrative.
Right.
And it's saving police officers between 50 and 80% of their time. But that would not have been possible if we'd not made the bet to make the cameras connected. And that's what customers were telling us they weren't interested in it. But we didn't only make a SKU, we went all in on it. And interestingly, I think 3 years later, one of our competitors, it's a public company, was asked on a conference call why they didn't have a connected camera. And their response was customers aren't asking for it.
Exactly. And you hear this all the time. And people think, I'm going to talk to the customer, they'll tell me what's right, I'm going to do that. And usually that's right. But when you're trying to create the future, it backfires because most of your customers aren't thinking about the future. They're thinking about where we are today.
Actually, I want to add one thing. And I do think that's where being a founder-led business can make some difference. I view my job as to inject risk-taking into the org. Not reckless risk-taking, but this sort of, we're going to take a risk that this technology is going to come and we're going to bet and we're not going to wait until it's safe.
Right.
That's very hard to do. I think if you're in a bigger company where it may, you don't get that license. If you came up through the ranks and you're like you're the new CEO who works at the pleasure of the board, you're going to be more risk averse. You can't afford for that thing to fail. Whereas I view if it fails, hey, that's part of business. If we don't have a few products that fail here and there, we're not pushing ourselves hard enough.
And one quick thing on that, I think Rick really does a good job of this with customers is the question isn't necessarily like, what do we need to build? It's what problem do we have to solve?
Right.
And then that gives a lot of, it kind of wipes the canvas clean of how we can solve the problem. And I think, as we think about kind of our next generation of products, solutions to existing problems that police officers have is kind of the core of it.
Well, I've actually found often that people are solving the wrong problems. They think, oh, this is the problem I need to solve. But if you ask, well, why do you want to solve that? They tell you that. Then you say, well, why do you want to solve that? And when you get it 2 or 3 whys down, then you realize what the problem really was.
Right.
And then you discover things that nobody's looking at.
That's right.
So on this point, you made the comment that maybe the officers didn't want people looking over their shoulder, and then we're overcoming that and realizing the extraordinary value of this. But this brings up a larger question about the ethical challenges and implications, not just in public safety and security, there certainly are many there, but in all of our realms of life. With artificial intelligence, virtual reality, all these data about all of us, anywhere, anytime, any place. How does AXON think about and incorporate these ethical conversations as you develop your products and services and work with your customers?
So actually one thing I'm really proud of, Josh and then his sort of predecessor was a guy named Luke Larson, who had stood up the leadership development program that actually brought Josh into the company, led an effort on values, corporate values. We're really inspired by Amazon because we'd heard their values become real things that people say in meetings and it drives behaviors. I actually think these guys outperformed Amazon in putting together our values because we got them down to 2 words. And one of them, for example, is win right. We all have t-shirts say win right. That you'll hear it in meetings when people are debating about like making different decisions. Hey, is this a win right? Is this something we're going to be proud of?
And the other was aim far.
We have aim far, win right, expect candor. That actually was specific. I put that one in our values because I get awkward having hard conversations with people. So expect candor is like, okay, we're going to have an expect candor moment. I've got to give you some delicate feedback. But that's to push people, hey, don't sit on information that you need to deal with the problems now. There's aim far.
Own it, join forces.
Yeah, own it. Like whatever, it's not just your job. If you see a problem, you own it. Join forces is, hey, no silos. Like we're all one team.
And then the last one's be obsessed, which kind of took from Amazon, Jeff Bezos.
Be obsessed?
Be obsessed. Like it's all about customer obsession. It's probably the most important one.
Anyway, so some of that starts with our product managers. We say, look, we're going to build products we're proud of. Yes, they eventually need to make money. We're going to be proud of it. If we do something that blows up on us, like it's not worth it. We want to win right. So look, the privacy thing is interesting because people put these binary things on it, like, oh, AI, yes or no, or it feels like we can't go back to what privacy was in the 1950s. Like cameras are everywhere. Now, it comes down to sort of data governance. Like, how are we going to use them? One school of thought is like, lock them all down and they're all not really useful.
Right.
Well, if it's your loved one who was kidnapped or killed or a child was taken, like, I think your viewpoint would suddenly shift. Oh, wait a minute. We have all these cameras everywhere. We should find ways where we can use them to make the world safer, to deter aberrant violent behaviors.
Yeah.
And at the same time, not use them to track what social club people go to or what doctor they see, or all the privacy things people worry about. Those to me seem like imminently solvable problems.
Yeah.
And so I think one of our superpowers is we will step into the things that are controversial, and we'll do them as long as we feel we understand the concerns, and we're going to do it in a way we'll be proud of, because we want to move the world forward. And I think we can use cameras and sensors to make the world a lot safer without turning the United States into a totalitarian Orwellian, regime.
Well, I tell people I work with, students and clients and entrepreneurs I've invested in, this stuff is coming, it's inexorable. We've got to be smart about and considerate about how we do it. But somewhere in this universe of 8 billion people, somebody's doing it, whatever it is. So figure out how to do it rather than whether to do it or not. Are either of you seeing cool stuff around the world, people in other countries, other environments where they're really pushing the envelope and your AXON's learning from that?
I think there's been a couple of cases of that over the years. The one that's comes to mind was when we were expanding into Australia, and we kind of came with our core U.S. offering of a body cam digital evidence management solution, and the customer said, you know what, one of the challenges we have in these moments, I think there had just been a mass shooting or a kind of a mass knife attack in one of the states in Australia. And they said, look, we need a faster way to ingest real-time video and photos from civilians as a whole. Like, they have a lot of times the keys to unlock. You think back to the Boston Marathon where, there was a fixed camera, and then they sent out like, hey, we're looking for this person, right? That kind of dynamic where people can submit evidence to the police easily. And that became what is now called AXON Citizen, which is a way for a police officer or police agency to solicit all digital assets from civilians that they're willing to submit to police for the purpose of investigating it.
Yeah, it's an interesting wrinkle, because where people talk about, well, what is government going to do with that's a fair conversation, but what are we doing with video and content? And human beings are posting stuff all over the place all the time, good or bad. Rick, you were going to say?
Another for you. Facial recognition.
Okay.
So we are seeing that widely used in Europe and other places that, candidly, in many ways, are more privacy-centric than the U.S.
Yeah.
Whereas I'd say in the U.S., there's been a much more visceral negative reaction to facial recognition. Now, we years ago formed an AI ethics board. It's evolved into what we now call our Equity and Ethics Advisory Council. Mm-hmm. And their job is to represent the voices I don't normally hear, basically the people that are on the receiving end of policing. They might be more critical, have concerns about policing. And we use that as a way to surface what those concerns are while we're still developing products. And it's helped us make different product decisions. One of those early on was it actually led us to say we wouldn't put face recognition on body cameras. It's like 4 or 5 years ago. And part of that was, like, the technology was not ready. It would have crushed the battery life, frankly, on the cameras. There were unanswered legal questions. There were bias questions in how it performed against different, ethnicities. I think, though, we're going to get to a point where machine vision is going to be far superhuman in its ability to actually match people and identify them. And then the question is, okay, for what use cases do we really have an obligation, if we can better identify and avoid misidentification if we're using AI, or for finding the most dangerous people. So we stepped away from face recognition, but we always said, look, this is something we're going to come and look back at. We see our EU customers actually doing this in ways we can learn from in terms of how they're doing privacy preservation and data handling and all that.
Right. So, and for you, these are your customers around the world become different laboratories. They're trying different things. They're asking for different capabilities. They're willing to, or not willing to go in various directions. So you have the opportunity to engage with lots of them and learn through that whole process. Well, let's extend this to your customers right now. What are some things some priorities that you're hearing from them, not just for this next year, but for the next few years? Or what are some priorities you think public safety security professionals should be considering for the medium term, say 3 to 5 years out?
Well, one of them is is actually how to engage more broadly with the public and with enterprises.
Yeah.
So a large portion, look, crime happens everywhere. Sometimes it's on a public street. Many times it's in a retail setting or healthcare. I was shocked to learn recently just how the majority of workplace violence in America happens in healthcare settings now. And I think nurses—
Say that again.
The majority of workplace violence happens in healthcare settings. Look, just between mental health, rampant drug
Elder
issues,
care.
Elder care, you have sometimes dementia, people get violent, or look, you might have even gang violence in inner cities. The violence can spill over into the ER.
Wow.
And so one of the fastest areas of growth we're seeing right now is actually just connecting. So right now we connect all the cameras within a police department, but we acquired this company, Fusus, because they have created a privacy preserving tech where they can go to any business. It could be a school, it could be a Walmart, it could be, anything where they can say, look, you don't have to replace all your cameras. Here's a converter box. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you a way that you set the rules, but when your people hit a panic button, you can set it up so all your cameras are now live to the police. Like imagine the value of that if there's a school shooter, right? Right now, there's some agencies will be like, oh, we've got a list somewhere of like all the local school, web logins and passcodes, which is very hard to do in the moment. So that I think is a really interesting growth area of public-private partnership. How do we create something where private entities can choose when to share their cameras and give them control to share these sensors in? And ultimately, I think that I'm a parent. You need love and discipline. Love without discipline, you can get some pretty awful things that happen in your kids' development. I think the same thing is true of society. I think we've seen some areas of the country that have had too much love and no discipline. Like, oh, we're going to decriminalize shoplifting and things.
Right.
It's been a horror show.
We experienced that in Chicago, my hometown. Fortunately, I think people are coming around that there is a balance that we have to strike.
And now, at the same point, we need to be careful. I'm personally interested in incarceration as the next area of thought. Like throwing people in jail is the ultimate medieval technology. Like it goes back to caveman days. There are times you need to do that. If you have a dangerous person, you need to sequester them from society.
Right.
But there are many lower level crimes where we need to find ways to deter it, ways to punish it, not fully decriminalize it. But it's also true, like throwing somebody into the prison system, you may have just created a downward cycle from which they will never recover. So I don't have the answers there yet, but it's an area I'm starting to study intellectually, like what are different approaches that aren't decriminalization of things that lead to explosions of more low-level crime, but don't go to the other direction of all discipline and no love, where it's like throw everybody in jail.
So the love, discipline, balancing act. So Josh, what are you seeing on the 3 to 5 year, say, horizon for public safety security professionals?
Yeah, I think, look, one thing, another example of, one thing we're hearing from the market right now is these car chases that you see on TV. Of course, there's been some famous ones historically, like there's a high injury rate and a high death rate in those. And when you think about it from like a first principle standpoint, it's like, well, that car's going somewhere. Why don't we just meet the car wherever it's going? And so we're talking about ways that we can limit this idea that, hey, how would a police officer be able to do this differently instead of chasing a car at high speed with civilians all over the place? How do you use either drone technology or other
data analytics, drone technology, AI,
even taser technology in terms of how we can potentially achieve that with getting a tracker on the car or something like that? I think that's one that's very visible to people that over the next 3 to 5 years we have a real chance to.
Or one that just came up yesterday. We're having some discussions with various consumer app companies. One of them is a company called Citizen that's built an engaged social community around public safety. And these are people that are interested in policing incidents, et cetera. And one of the things, and we haven't even tested this with a customer yet because it just came up. What if we activated the public when there's a police pursuit? So these people that are engaged on the Citizen app or another platform, hey, there's a police pursuit, keep an eye out. And if you see this car going by, take a video of it. Well, now if you get enough engaged people, I was in San Francisco, and there was within a quarter mile, I think there was like 100,000 or 50,000 active people who've opted in to receive these alerts.
Wow.
Which could be a very interesting way to begin to activate. Again, it'd be another way the public's already engaging around policing issues to connect the police in, and now suddenly, if we could bring the power of the crowd,
sort of the social media communities of law enforcement and safety.
Yeah, and look. There's going to be some risks that come with this as well. namely, like, okay, is there caringism, or the thing of like people sort of overly reporting on each other and things.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think those are just things. Those are tuning questions that you could tune over
Sure.
time.
Sure. I want to go back briefly to this question of values, because you spend a lot of time, you hone these values. Everybody knows these 5 values at AXON. They all sound great. They all make perfect sense. I want to live in a world like that. But make it tangible. How does a value then turn into behavior?
Yeah, I think, look, when we take a step back, I think you had asked earlier about, how do we translate what's in Rick's brain to businesses and in things that create value for customers in terms of like how we operate around those things. And it comes down to both, you got to have the right people and you got to have the right structure that allows those people to be good at what they do. Yeah. And the values are a great example of something that we can measure people against as we're bringing them into the company. We use real life scenarios in terms of, like an example would be on joint forces. Like, tell us about a time where you and one of your coworkers or direct reports had a serious conflict about what the right strategy was, and how did you resolve it and get to a place that that led to a good outcome, or owning it. Like, what's an example? We ask salespeople a lot, like, when did you miss your quota? And they say, hey, I missed it in 2019, and I was 10% short or whatever. And it's like, well, what could you have done differently to affect that? And it's interesting because some salespeople will say, look, nothing. I didn't have the right product to sell. I covered my territory.
Those guys in engineering,
those guys
behind,
aren't necessarily in this building today, right? Like and so we can test for these things, and we work them into storytelling in the company. We work them into our identity as a business and how we focus. Like, be obsessed. This year, one of the things, like, we come out with a few things we want to focus on each year that tie back to our values. One of them this year is we want to put the customer first together, meaning not only is everybody in this building thinking about how our customers remain at the center of the universe, but it's also like, how do we work together to achieve that? So it's not only selling them the product of sales that can save lives, it's also making sure we build it appropriately and send it out and do all the things that we need to do to achieve that outcome as a team. And so we try to really focus, on how do we make sure that the people in the building live up to our values, but how do we let those values translate into business outcomes that we're looking for?
And a great example is what you guys are doing in quoting right now. Like, quoting is a financial function. It's a little disconnected from the customer, but this like customer first together sort of approach, it's inspirational. So the people that are working in these quoting systems, they've got their own frustrations trying to get their job done, but this becomes like a guiding principle. Like, okay, we need, even though it might make things harder internally, for us to do things that make it clear when the customer gets a quote, or if they want to, change their orders, et cetera. Like, sometimes the things that work, accounting gets really complex as a public company when you do as many different things as we do. But we need to make it simple for our customer. And sometimes that means it makes it harder for people internally, but it's easier to have those conversations when they can be sort of grounded in values versus otherwise you might get like sort of politics between, well, the finance department thinks we should do this, because otherwise it's difficult for their internal systems, and the sales team wants to do that. Like, this helps sort of bring people together. Like,
and in quoting and sales, there's nothing more important than winning right.
Yeah, of course.
And that affects people, the way people see a situation.
Yeah.
Win right is probably the most influential. You'll hear all the time when we're talking about making an accommodation for a customer. Hey, like, something went wrong. They're having some issues.
Let's
Should
own
we
it.
go ahead and prospectively replace those? I mean, yes, it's going to cost us money to do that. We also have to be financially responsible and make sure we're not being, flippant about just, solving every problem by throwing money or resources out. But again, it helps drive us to get to that balanced outcome.
And we hold ourselves accountable on the values. Like on Aim FAR, we have our annual planning conference every June. That's called the Aim FAR conference. 3 or 4 years into it, kind of had this feeling like, well, are we really aiming far if we're talking about our 1 to 3 year product strategy and budget? That doesn't feel like aiming far.
Yeah, Josh, I tell people, so when I go and meet a group at a company, I'm putting them into 3 buckets. One is their leadership team that has a strategy and they're just trying to implement and make it better. A second type is they don't have a strategy. They don't really have a strategy, and they know it. And not having a strategy. So I have an operating plan extrapolated out 3 years. That's not a strategy. That's an operating plan extrapolated out 3 years. Nothing wrong with that.
At AXON, we would call that our next play. What's our next play? And so our conference now, that used to be called AIM-FAR, is now Next Play. And now our long-range planning event that we're going to do in December, that's AIM-FAR.
That's brilliant, because they're very different exercises.
Totally.
But then the third one, you know where this is going. The third type of group is they don't have a strategy and they think they have a strategy. Those tend to be the hardest ones to do.
Those are always fun folks
you got to open their eyes.
Yes.
Well, speaking of fun folks to work with, what's something in your journey at AXON so far that has surprised you, and what can we learn from it?
Wow, great question.
I'll take it first. I would say for me, if I could go back and slap my 23-year-old self, the one piece of advice I would have given is...
Did you need slapping at 23?
I did. I would say the first 15 years, I did not take hiring seriously enough. I was very focused on the tech things we were going to do, got the vision, and I was involved in execution. And look, we hired a lot of really nice human beings, but sometimes we just, you'd sort of be haphazard about it, and we didn't have this rigor about, we need to be hiring the best possible people for the job. And somebody introduced me, it was actually Luke, the predecessor for Josh. I talked about having me go watch this Netflix presentation on culture and HR. And basically it was, hey, you want to be building a pro sports team, not a family. Families put up with...
Say that again. You want to be building a pro sports team, not a family.
Not a family. Because families put up with, crazy relatives and all that. But a pro sports team, it's like, hey, you might be my good buddy, but you're past your prime and we're going to replace you. We're going to get a new quarterback next year. It's just a different framing. And when we made that pivot, I would say in the middle of my career, this place was getting a bit toxic because we were putting up with toxic behaviors. We were running it like a family. And then we really pivoted, both Luke and then Josh, to this idea that, and that's where Josh talks about himself as a sports coach. And I've also learned along the way, I'm really not good at hiring people. I'm more of a cheerleader. He's more of a head coach. I'm good at getting people excited, and I get excited about them. I'm not good at having hard conversations and delivering the tough message and all that. So I've learned to just step away. And I trust Josh. He's much more skeptical on people, which is good when you're hiring, because you don't want to hire everybody. You want to hire only
by the way,
best.
I use a model in that respect that I learned from a mentor of mine in my 20s. He was nuts. He had 2 PhDs. She said it was a stupid idea. But anyway, he said there are two kinds of people, Tiggers and Eeyores. And you need both. And they need to work together. And so you're the Tigger, you're kind of more the Eeyore, but you're a very all-in positive Eeyore, I must say.
Well, I guess between the two of us, I'll take it.
Rick went great. That analogy went great for Rick just now.
But you're what I call a constructive Eeyore.
Yeah.
And there's a difference. We don't have time to go into it now. There are destructive Tiggers and constructive Tiggers.
Yeah.
Destructive Eeyores, constructive Eeyores.
Yeah.
And when you have constructive Tiggers and Eeyores together in an organization, you can create the future. So
no, I think there's definitely some truth to that, for sure.
So Josh, what's something you've learned that has surprised you in your journey here?
So I got here in 2009, which was, Rick described that period in time. It was not our best moment as a company. We had launched several products 2 weeks after I joined that were not, it was the X-Rep, the Shockwave, and the X3, which those that write the story of AXON won't spend a lot of time on those products. Let's put it that way.
Apple came close to the brink too. So it's pretty good. You got some good company.
And then you start to have some success. We kind of learn from that, and in the video business and in the taser business, things started to grow. And then you have this vision of wow, we're going to be like a 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 person company, and how awesome would that be, and so forth. Actually, one of the biggest surprises that I've seen is that really sucks sometimes. It's like, I've kind of changed my kind of thinking about this, where being a big company in terms of headcount, there's some good that comes with that, in that it's like you recognize how successful you've been up to this point to be able to go hire that many people. But I think that's probably the biggest trap that exists in scaling a business, is this idea that more people is better, and more, and you get more done. In fact, I think you get far less done when you have more people.
So what advice do you have for people who are blessed with the opportunity to scale like AXON has?
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? Because you feel like, I need more people here. I need more people all over the place. We've got to keep up with customer demand.
Yeah.
We got to do it, eat while there's food on the table. Let's hire people.
Yeah.
What advice do you have?
Well, I think there's some things that naturally translate. Like, number one, we got to have clear priorities on what we're trying to achieve. And then our compass for that should be like, what's the fewest number of people that can get us to this outcome? And I think, frankly, like, part of my job is I look at every new role we're approving and hiring. Down to a customer service rep who's kind of an entry-level hire into AXON. It's like, when we have an environment where people feel like they're almost failing by asking for more people instead of being applauded for asking for more people, I'd actually much rather live in that world, because when somebody raises their hand and say, I really need this, that you can actually trust, like, they've
really
hit the breaking, like, we're going to break if we don't hire this. And I think we
haven't achieved that yet.
Yeah, we're still evolving into that. I think one of the places where we're digging into a lot is just this idea that, like, managers manage managers that manage managers. And it's like, no, like, the people who create the value in this company are creators. They're the people who are formerly known as individual contributors. They're the ones that do the work and should get the credit for that. And frankly, the fewest number of managers that we could possibly have to achieve the outcomes that our ICs are looking for, our creators are looking for, I think that's kind of the North Star for us at this point.
We push that because you're fighting human nature. Human nature is, I want to become a manager, and the more people that report to me,
the more important I am.
The more important I am.
Yeah.
And then the less I work at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so, I hate the term individual contributor because it just sounds demeaning. Of course, you want to be a manager, not an individual contributor. And so we've started using the term creator. Like, those are people who actually do the work. Yes, being manager is glorious enough. We try to de-glorify it a bit. It's like, hey, yes, you can be a manager, but there's a lot of glory in being a creator. I'm a creator. I'm not a manager. Like, Josh runs the company, so I can focus on creator work.
Well, so you've hit a big nerve in the AI space. Because if you think about the opportunity to track and oversee and direct and redirect, more and more of that can be done by artificial intelligence. And I won't say the exact companies, but I have a very good friend in the casino space. And they've been rolling out AI to the floor with the objective being, we want to improve the experience of the people on the floor, of our customers, of our guests. And they have a floor staff, and the floor staff's doing the human things like, hey, can I get you another drink, Rick? And it's great to see you and all this. And then they had a supervisor, and then the supervisor had a supervisor. And what they're finding is, because everything, every drink order, every interaction with the consumer on the floor is recorded, they realize, what, we can actually get rid of that intermediate supervisor now, because that's doing the system, and it just takes one person to oversee.
Yeah.
And now they're saying, do we really need that one person?
Wow.
And meanwhile, our people.
I'd love an offline reference to these people. I'd love to learn
I'm
from their
happy to
experience.
connect you with the entrepreneur in question, because he's super brilliant and crazy.
Yeah.
Not to cast any dispersions, but I feel that here too.
Yeah.
Brilliance and a craziness to turn dreams into reality. I'm happy to introduce you. But what's most exciting about this story is the satisfaction of the consumers on the floor has increased.
Yep.
And the satisfaction of the staff, the cocktail waitresses, for instance, the croupiers, everybody, that's increased too.
Yeah.
Because they have line of sight to, how do I make more money?
Yeah.
How do I hit my objectives? How do I satisfy my consumers?
Yeah.
In a way they didn't have before.
Yeah.
That you can't do in a quarterly review.
I think it's really, it's human nature that, hey, the more managers you have, the more they want to justify their own
the more they kind of have to.
And then the more work they create that doesn't actually drive any value.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the right combination of, like, hey, what's just the right amount of management, but also you got to have the right people that are self-aware there. Like, if you, if it would be equally catastrophic if you have one layer of management and none of them know what they're doing. So we got to find the right balance of, we've got within management, but every single one of those managers is the manager that is going to create value for our customer here, and that's going to be a good culture fit,
Right.
and that's going to be part of the team for a long time.
And you can then bring in more of those creators who are out there
Totally.
connecting the dots,
Totally.
understanding what consumers want, understanding what's possible, even though the customer can't tell you that.
Totally.
So Rick and Josh, it's now 2033. You're being lauded, AXON is being lauded, your customers, your partners, all these agencies you work with are being lauded because this happened.
Yep.
50% decrease
Yeah.
in gun deaths. What's next?
The next play.
What's
So
the next play?
there, once we've cut gun-related deaths in policing from 1,200 a year to 600 a year,
Yeah.
then we're going after gun deaths society-wide from 40,000 a year to 20,000 a year.
Wow.
That's our Mars shot.
Wow. So you,
When we entered law enforcement, we actually entered law enforcement to prove that taser technology could be viable. I started in the consumer space, and consumers didn't believe it worked. And frankly, they were right. The early generations were super buggy, and we spent the last 25 years proving our mettle in policing, and we will continue to do that. But in 2033, we'll have non-lethal weapons that outperform lethal weapons in immediate stopping power. And then we're going to take that out and we're going to make the bullet obsolete, at least for human use. Hunters, go nuts, but it'll make no sense to shoot a human. And that's what we'll do between 2033 and 2043.
And I think
so
that's
your belief is, in our lifetimes, we're going to make bullets to shoot humans obsolete.
It will be clearly the suboptimal. It will not be the most effective choice.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think this is a very telling, part of our culture in general, which is like, no one kind of falls in love with what we've done in the past. Like, it would be awesome to achieve this, and we'll recognize that, and we'll think about it for a day or two. But like, the next thing is like, yeah, how do we keep moving the ball down the field? There's not a lot of, and that's a hard thing in our culture in general. Like, This isn't a culture where people pat themselves on the back for doing great work. That's just the license to do something bigger and better the next day.
But now, hold on a minute. How do we know when aiming far is too far? Is it ever too far?
No, there's always, like, no matter where you are, there's the next mountain. And when there's no more aiming far to be done, that's probably time for me to go retire and bring in somebody else who's got the vision to aim far again.
Yeah. Great.
Or like, there might be a time where, look, the company gets big and hits a scale where maybe it's okay to let it coast. Again, I know it's probably not the place for me. It's probably not the place for Josh at that point.
No.
Yeah, at that point, like, what are we doing?
Yeah, I would say this. Let me just tell you a story. I was at a board meeting in San Francisco, and my wife sends me a text message, says there's somebody in the house. So I call her. I say, have you called the police? She says, no, I've got the taser. I'm going downstairs. I'm like, hold on, time out. Like, we have a safe room in our house. Go get in the safe room. Call the police, which she did. But it sort of got me thinking, like, if you want to feel safe in America and you worry about crime and all that, most people go buy a gun. Some people go buy a taser. But regardless of what you buy, you are now relying on yourself to be a weapon operator when you're scared and it's not something you do regularly.
Right.
And like, especially when you bring a gun into your house, boy, the risk that comes with that. I mean,
Even the best trained, intentioned people, there are mistakes.
well, yeah, and people get drunk and depressed and commit suicide with it. That's happened within my, sphere of friends and family. Kids get a hold of it. I mean, there's a parade of horribles that can happen.
Yeah.
Now, instead, imagine when my wife got worried, she hit a button. Several drones dropped down in the house. All right, Mrs. Smith, this is Captain Jones, retired U.S. Air Force. I'm on with police dispatch. They are 3 minutes and 23 seconds out. Your husband's on. He's watching the drone feed. I've got drones on the kids' rooms. I'm patrolling, right? An immediate response with a professional operator. We can take away all the risks. You can't commit suicide with it. The kids can't commit mischief with it. Now, it does introduce maybe some new, you got to make sure we have good cybersecurity. People couldn't hack into this. But I think ultimately, I want to take the glory out of violence. Like, we still think of like violence and protection in this medieval trial by combat way. It's the good night and the bad night. And I think even frankly, the mentally disturbed folks who do these mass shootings, they want to go down in a blaze of glory. They want to, I'm going to have my fight with the police and I'm going to go down shooting. Like, movies and the arts all revolve around the glorification of violence. I don't make violence boring. It's like, hey, you pull a gun out in public, there is a piece of technology that identifies you and has appropriate human oversight.
Yes.
but you're down before things even escalate, and nobody gets their big shootouts
And
anymore.
by the way, Rick, that's proximity. That's anything, anywhere, anytime, at a moment's notice. And so your wife doesn't have to decide whether she's going to pull the taser out or run to the safe room. It identifies the problem and responds to it before she even has to worry
Well,
about
proximity, your proximity concepts are all new to me. I'm looking forward to reading the book. But yeah, I want to make violence something that is just kind of unthinkable,
Right.
because it's illogical to even try. And can we do that without creating an oppressive system? Absolutely. You think about how oppressive violence in America is today, especially in our poorer communities. It is very oppressive. I know we can do this in a way that fulfills the tenets of democracy and privacy. There is no like right to like be pulling a gun out and being violent in public with other people like that.
I took a World Innovation Network, our group Twin Global. We just kind of get together a few times a year to talk about the future. And we took a group to Rwanda. And the reason we went to Rwanda was a few of my twinians are well invested there. One of them moved there, started a business. It's really a miracle. 30 years ago, they had a genocide. And it's unimaginable. Imagine trying to make any decisions in that context. Talk about oppression. Today, 30 years later, they're the most successful country in Africa on most metrics, full stop. It's absolutely extraordinary. And some of the things you're talking about here, like the use of drone technology, they're already using it, for instance, to bring blood and medical supplies all across the country in a matter of hours using drones. And so they're leapfrogging us. There are things going on in the world that give hope of this sort of things that you're talking about. So speaking about that future, what's one thing that people get wrong about the future?
Oh, I think science fiction does us a disservice with so much dystopianism. There's, because look, a good story has got to have the arc of character. I'll give you an example. Minority Report. They envisioned a world where they had a technology that is 100% effective, took murders to zero in a violent country, took false convictions to zero. And yet, the person who created the system was able to find a backdoor and frame one person. And yet, to me, that is an unimaginably crazy good system that they developed on all metrics. But the storytelling left everybody coming away. And Minority Report is what everybody refers to. Oh, I would never want to live in Minority Report, because the storyline got me so hooked, right? They got us cheering in the movies when Hannibal Lecter, escaped from prison by killing the security guard and wearing his face. Storytelling, science fiction brings us many new ideas, but storytelling can also distort sort of,
Well, I mean, I agree with you to an extent. I'm an optimist about the future. I'm so excited to see where this is going and thankful to be alive at this time in history. But I also have a great value for well-articulated dystopic science fiction. If you think about Brave New World in 1984, they're like the guardrails of what we don't want to happen, but they both express extraordinary technologies, capabilities, insights into humanity, and it allows us to confront these things before they actually happen and think about them in various ways before they happen.
I agree with you. I just, I didn't think about it. I think it can over-trigger people on fear of what's new.
Absolutely. Josh, what's something people get wrong about the future?
I don't know that they get it wrong, but I think they ignore the convergence of several disruptive technologies at the same time. They're very focused on one and not our concept of disruptive non-lethal weapons and taser technology coupled with drones and robotics would be a good example of that, where there are things that happen where they combine to a exponentially better outcome than as a standalone
and by the way, this is an example where I think some of the dystopianism, following Uvalde, the shootings in Uvalde, I have twins that are the same age as those kids. I was, like many people, very upset, laying in bed with my wife, talking about things. And, I'd already written the concept of a taser-capable drone, and I basically pushed through with our board. We're going to announce, because look, we all know what's going to happen. This is going to get politicized, and one side of the spectrum is going to say every teacher should have a gun. The other side is going to say we shouldn't have guns in America, and they're going to fight. And nothing's going to happen. So I said, if ever there's a time, we should announce we could build a taser-capable drone for schools that could have, within seconds, could be on scene to stop active shooters. And I was shocked at just the negative
reaction.
The reaction was overwhelmingly negative, especially in social media. to the point we had to walk it back and say, okay, we're not going to do this. We're going to go research it. Now, the first thing we did in research was we actually went and we did public sentiment polling through an independent polling party.
Yeah.
And we found 60% of the public was in favor of this concept from a cold start, with about 17% against. We then had those people, half of them read a negative story, one of the sensational ones written against us, and the other half read one of my articles on why we should do this. What was interesting, both cohorts went up. So even if you read a negative article, the more you thought about it, well, I guess compared to like the way we stop a person with a gun today is we send in more people with more guns and we have a gunfight.
Right.
That's bonkers. If it's my kid's school, I want to stop the shooter, but man, it scares me to think like you're going to have a SWAT team coming in and more bullets flying around compared to if
you're going to have a SWAT team coming in 10 minutes later.
Yes.
With more bullets.
10 minutes if you're lucky. So anyway, that's where, that's an example where now we have said we are going to continue to research. We bought a drone company. It's kind of obvious the concept is not dead. We're very conscious about digging in and understanding the potential misuse cases. We will build fantastic safety and security technology to control for that. But that's an example where that kind of backlash could ultimately have killed the technology if we don't, we're going to have very strong answers to be able to overcome all that.
And maybe the technology at first is more applicable in other use cases like public shootings, or outside of schools, and we learn a lot there, and then we adapt it to schools. Maybe not, but the idea that a robot armed with something less lethal.
Well, it's better than a human surging with adrenaline and fear with their finger on the trigger.
Well, you're on the right track. I mean, one of the things, and I can bring both of your observations together. You said the convergence of technologies, and you started, Rick, talking about multiple layers of the problem. One of the problems I see at a lot of established, successful companies is that they continue on a track, and they're always trying to get better at that track. And they don't say, well, what are these things on the periphery that are happening that we could one day be serious? How do we start to experiment with that and bring that in, and the convergence of various capabilities?
And I think if you were to, describe what AXON does and what Rick does, I think that's a very good way to describe it is, this company and Rick are the best in the world at applying disruptive technologies to solve problems in public safety. And I think that's kind of our playbook, is identify the trends that are happening, whether it was cloud computing like Rick talked about, whether it was wearables like our body cams back in the day, now it's drones, virtual reality, robotics. Like, how do we apply those technologies in ways that solve real problems?
So, and I would end with this thought. As much as I'm proud of how well we do this, I'm at once insanely optimistic about what's possible with these new technologies. And as a CEO of a large public company, I'm terrified at how easily, I want to continue to be the disruptor, not the disrupted. But the future is unknowable, and they both could happen. That's part of what keeps the story interesting too.
Well, Rick,
success is not guaranteed.
Rick, that's Andy Grove, former CEO of Intel. At the moment, Intel was a monopoly, and he writes a book, Only the Paranoid Survive. And look what happened in the past couple of decades since Andy Grove left. So you're right on. So I only have a couple more questions to ask. You're not only a company in the public safety and security arena, you're also an engine for making sci-fi reality. What's your favorite sci-fi and why? I suppose we have to start with the sci-fi guy. What's your favorite sci-fi and why?
Yeah, actually,
you can only pick one.
I can only pick one.
Yeah.
Boy, that's going to be hard.
That's why I did it.
Because there's the storyline, there's the tech. I would actually say the movie Transcendence, about the virtualization of a human consciousness. Actually, that's for a film. My overall favorite sci-fi is the Nexus series by Ramez Nam. Have you read it?
I haven't.
It is the story of a brain-computer interface that comes in the form of a drug that people take that allows them to basically give Wi-Fi nodes to connect to each other. It's both a very well-written science fiction, and there's a lot of kind of science in it.
Right,
and
right.
I actually think the biggest change in humanity that is coming is going to be the transcendence of our consciousness beyond the wetware that we run on today. And so that ultimately, I think, is the most most interesting space. It may not be the most dramatic of stories, but yeah, the Ramez Nam Nexus book series is 3-book series about the shift of human consciousness that's coming.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, that's the transition we will experience this century for the first time in human history. The transition to fully virtually real virtual worlds and the transcendence beyond our physical body and our consciousness. Josh, science fiction, what role does it play? And if you want to, you can answer any work of literature. It doesn't even have to be sci-fi.
Yeah, sure.
Film, anything you want.
My favorite, and I'm not sure this would qualify, I think it would, is the movie Inception, where it's like, what is the birthplace of an idea, and how does that take shape, and how does that, lead to a series of events that could be good or bad or life-changing or not. But where do ideas come from, and how do other people influence the idea of, when you have somebody who is very creative, how can other people participate in that concept of ideation?
Fantastic. Well, the co-author for my next book, Post Virtual, Moran Cerf, was an advisor to that film.
Very
to the
cool.
Film Inception.
Very
All right,
cool.
Concluding question.
Yeah.
Rick and Josh, 3 words to describe about how you feel about the future, and do not explain them. 3 words to describe how you feel about the future, and do not explain them. Who'd like to start?
Insanely optimistic. And I've done it
Oh,
too.
you got-
do I have to do 3?
No, that's your prerogative. You've been immensely efficient. Insanely optimistic. Josh.
I would say unwritten. Trying to think of one word that describes the ability to write your own path. Like you have
Unwritten journey.
an unwritten journey, or an owned unwritten journey. You have the potential to determine what that looks like.
Insanely optimistic about our owned unwritten journey. I must say that AXON's in the middle of writing a lot of people's journeys, and it's exciting to have been along for the ride, watching this company evolve and your vision evolve. Josh, your role of turning dreams into reality, it doesn't become tangible for people in the world unless somebody can turn it into something real. An example that was exciting to me was the use of VR to provide a visceral training experience. Incredibly useful, almost I would say essential.
Mm-hmm.
And to make it a place where people try stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And where the creators are dying to be here.
Yep.
Where the creators are can't wait to be part of the AXON community. But not only...
Yeah, let me share one story with you on that.
Yeah, please.
We recently shut down our dispatch software project. We had on the order of $50 million invested in this. And it was software for 911 call takers. We thought we could innovate. And what we learned was actually that was a place, the training takes like 6 months to a year for somebody to do this. And the example that one of the engineers shared with me was the QWERTY keyboard.
Yeah.
The shape of our keyboards was determined in the 1870s to optimize so you didn't get jams in a typewriter.
Keys don't jam, yeah.
And there's been better designs, but people wouldn't change. And when we shut that down, we had some pretty intense conversations, like with Josh and the other members of management. I said, I want to celebrate this. I want to make sure everybody knows nobody lost their job, nobody got fired. And we put up pictures of exploding rocket ships, and then the chart of the tonnage of material taken into space over the last 10 years, where SpaceX was this tiny little thing, and now they are 10 times bigger than the rest of the world combined, because they weren't afraid to blow up some rocket ships. Now they were thoughtful. They didn't put people on them until they knew they wouldn't blow up.
Right.
And we use that like internally as a rallying cry. Look, we tried this, it failed. It's okay. We need to do more things like that. And you're going to be okay if you fail trying something that's risky. You have to calibrate it. Obviously, we're not going to count it into like stupid, sloppy errors. But I think that epitomizes what we're trying to do, is make it safe for people to take risks and do bold things.
Well, as Josh said, when you have the priorities and you put the right resources and people against them, and you do it in a way that celebrates the creation of the future, sometimes things don't go well. But are we aiming far enough?
If everything goes well,
then we're not aiming far enough by definition. And that's the kind of place creators are eager to be part of. And Rick, your job as a visionary leader, if I may say that, is to connect the dots. I've seen this in so many leaders who make the future happen, is they collect insights, information, ideas, questions, uncertainties from all over the place, and somehow they're able to bring them together in ways that other people aren't able to do. But you also recognize that creativity is a team sport. So we got to have a lot of these creators around and give them the support and the structure and the process and all those horrible things that creatives don't like, unless it makes them better, unless it helps them create the future they desire to create. I loved your comment about build a pro sports team, not a family. By the way, it always feels great when people say, we here at this company are a big family. That feels nice, but it actually is ridiculous. I mean, how many of you would want to rely on your crazy uncle to, manage your SEC reporting? So, let's take the glory out of violence. What are some of the other things you said? I'm insanely optimistic, and not just moonshots, but Mars shots. There might be only a handful of companies in the world that are seriously saying, I'm going to have a Mars shot in the future. And both you're probably literal and figurative as well.
So, well, luckily I have my token to go along
you do,
that journey.
yes, but it's not good until 2120.
But speaking of which, actually, I've got for you, you gave me a challenge going earlier. This is our moonshot challenge going. This is where we're calling our shot. We're going to cut gun deaths in half by 2032.
Amazing.
So,
Thank you. As to end where we began, how do we compete against ourselves? When we're creating the future and there isn't anybody nearby, we have to always, as Andy Grove said, only the paranoid survive. What's the right level of fear? How do we take smart bets that others can't? You have the opportunity to do that because you're founder-led now. And how do we transition to a place where Axon can continue to do that for decades into the future? I think the answer is somewhere in that balance you talked about, Rick, which is the balance between love and discipline. Here I see an extraordinary, beautiful, exciting, even inspirational space attempting to bring love and discipline together for the future. Thanks so much, and good luck to all you and the team and all your customers at Axon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.